We're going to get started here in just 1 minute. Thank you. All set when you are.
The June 22nd, 2020 special meeting of the Monroe County Legislature. I will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alcoffer. Mr. Alcoffer.
Here.
Mr. Alcoffer is present. Mr. Ansello.
Here.
Mr. Ansello is present. Ms. Barnhart.
Here.
Ms. Barnhart is present. Mr. Baroff.
Here.
Baroff is present. Mr. Baines.
Here.
Mr. Baines is present. Ms. Boyce.
Here.
Ms. Boyce is present. Mr. Brew.
Here.
Mr. Brew is present. President Carbone.
Here.
President Carbone is present. Mr. Delahanty.
Here.
Mr. Delahanty is present. Mr. Florio.
Here.
Mr. Florio is present. Mr. Dondorfer.
Here.
Mr. Dondorfer is present. Mr. Felder.
Here.
Mr. Felder is present. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell is present. Ms. Hassman.
Here.
Ms. Hassman is present. Mr. Hebert.
Here.
Mr. Hebert is present. Mr. Keofet-Lacey.
Here.
Mr. Keofet-Lacey is present. Ms. Lamar.
Here.
Ms. Lamar is present. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee. Mr. Mafucci.
Here.
Mr. Mafucci is present. Mr. Marionetti. Mr. Marionetti.
Here.
Mr. Marionetti is present. Mr. Morelli.
Here.
Mr. Morelli is present. Ms. Roman.
Here.
Roman is present. Ms. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Smith is present. Ms. Taylor. Ms. Taylor is present. Mr. Terp.
Here.
Mr. Terp is present. Mr. Wilcox.
Here.
Mr. Wilcox is present. Mr. Wilt.
Here.
Mr. Wilt is present. Mr. Udelson.
Here.
Mr. Udelson is present. Mr. Zale.
Here.
Mr. Zale is present. And Mr. Lee.
I believe Ms. Lee is having technical difficulties, as he was here.
Okay. We can hold open any votes. You want to proceed?
We will need to suspend the rules of the legislature for the purpose of prohibiting public in-person attendance in accordance with Executive Order 202.1 issued by Governor Andrew M. Cuomo on March 12, 2020. You have a motion before you which is moved by Legislator Brew and seconded by Legislator Zale. This is a non-debatable motion. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Item carries. Please join me in a moment of silent prayer. Might be back. please join Legislator Hebert as he leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it
stands
one nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
liberty,
justice for all.
and justice for all.
Okay, very good. I call this special meeting of the legislature pursuant to the authority vested in me as president of the Monroe County Legislature by section C2-9C1 of the county charter and section 545-5 of the rules of the legislature of the county of Monroe. This meeting has been closed to the public, and all legislators are participating via teleconference in accordance with Executive Order 202.1. In keeping with the legislature's tradition of openness, this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube through the legislature's official channel. Everyone participating via video or teleconference will please mute their devices except to obtain the floor or cast a vote. If seeking to obtain the floor, please simply state your name and wait for me to call on you before proceeding with your question or statement. The clerk will read the full title of each resolution and referral to avoid any confusion as to which item is before the legislature. All votes will be held via voice votes unless a roll call is requested. Tonight, we'll consider a motion to recess the special meeting and convene a committee of the whole. In doing so, we will also discharge those items currently referred to the committee and commit them to the committee of the whole. All legislators will be members of the committee of the whole and able to participate in debate and vote on items regardless of their respective committee assignments or which committee the referral was initially assigned. The committee of the whole will be governed by the same rules of the legislature that govern committee meetings, and the votes taken are equivalent to those taken in committee, meaning items passed by the committee of the whole will be considered for final approval or appropriate action at the May legislature. We will now hold the public forum. Mr. Clerk.
There's no one registered to address the legislature, nor were any written comments submitted.
We will now proceed with the consideration of motions, resolutions, and notices. Will the clerk read the next item on the agenda?
Item number 1, providing that file numbers 20-0205, 20-0208 through 20-0216, and 20-0220 through 20-0221 be discharged from agenda charter, public safety, recreation and education, planning and economic development, human services, transportation, intergovernmental relations, environment and public works, and ways and means committees, providing that the legislature convene a committee of the whole, and providing that file number 20-0205, 20-0208 through 20-0216, and 20-0220 through 20-0221 be committed to the committee of the whole.
Moved by legislator Brew, seconded by legislator Zale. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Item carries. This time, we'll recess the June 22nd, 2020 special meeting of the Monroe County Legislature, and we'll convene the committee of the whole. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alcoffer.
Here.
Mr. Alcoffer is here. Mr. Ansello.
Here.
Mr. Ansello is here. Ms. Barnhart.
Here.
Ms. Barnhart is here. Mr. Broth.
Here.
Mr. Broth is here. Mr. Baines.
Here.
Baines is here. Ms. Boyce.
Here.
Ms. Boyce is here. Mr. Brew.
Here.
Mr. Brew is here. President Carbone.
Here.
President Carbone is here. Mr. Delahanty.
Here.
Mr. Delahanty is here. Ms. DeFlorio.
Here.
Ms. DeFlorio is here. Mr. Dondorfer.
Here.
Mr. Dondorfer is here. Mr. Felder.
Here.
Mr. Felder is here. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Here.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell is here. Ms. Hassman.
Here.
Ms. Hassman is here. Mr. Hebert.
Here.
Mr. Hebert is here. Mr. Keofit Lacey.
Here.
Mr. Keofit Lacey is here. Ms. Lamar.
Here.
Lamar is here. Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Lee is here. Mr. Mafucci.
Here.
Mr. Mafucci is here. Mr. Marionetti.
Here.
Mr. Marionetti is here. Mr. Morelli.
Here.
Mr. Morelli is here. Ms. Roman.
Here.
Ms. Roman is here. Ms. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Smith is here. Ms. Taylor.
Here.
Ms. Taylor is here. Mr. Turp.
Here.
Mr. Turp is here. Mr. Wilcox. Come back to Mr. Wilcox. Mr. Wilt.
Here.
Mr. Wilt is here. Mr. Udelson.
Here.
Mr. Udelson is here. Mr. Zale.
Here.
Mr. Zale is here. Mr. Wilcox. Mr. Wilcox is presently absent.
We will now hold a public forum. Mr. Clerk?
No one is registered to address the committee of the whole, nor were any written comments submitted.
Rochelle Bell, Manager of Planning for Monroe County's Planning and Development Department, will now give an overview of the 2021-2026 Capital Improvement Program. Normally, this presentation would be separated by committee jurisdiction. However, since we are meeting as a committee of the whole, Ms. Bell will present on the entirety of the program. We will save discussion and questions for when we reach this item on the agenda. Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. President. You all should have a copy of the recommended 2021-2026 CIP. This report reflects the culmination of an 11-month process beginning in late summer.
I'm sorry, I can't hear Ms. Bell.
I'm not muted.
Nope, we can hear you, but you're a bit muffled.
I'm sorry. Let me see if I can move some things out of the way. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
That's better.
Okay. Well, it's very sensitive. So as I was saying, you should all have a copy of the 2021-2026 CIP. This report reflects the culmination of an 11-month process beginning in late summer with county departments proposing a 6-year funding plan for capital projects. A committee reviews the plans proposed by the county department and asks for changes to their 6-year programs based on the overall project priority and fiscal constraints and opportunities. The planning board, after review by the county executive, the committee then presents the CIP to the county executive, and then it is submitted to the county planning board. The planning board reviews the CIP, holds a public hearing, and sets priorities for the capital budget year, which is the first year of the CIP, 2021 in this case. The planning board returns the recommended CIP to the county executive, who then submits it to your honorable body. At the July meeting of the legislature, you will set a public hearing for your August meeting, and then upon your favorable review, you will vote to adopt the plan. The 6-year capital program is summarized in Table 1 on pages 2 to 3 of your CIP. We'll look at the program in terms of funding sources, budget year funding, and new projects. Funding sources are defined on page 1 of your CIP in the 3rd paragraph down. The funding table for each project will indicate whether the funding source is C, which stands for county funding, which we will bond for, CC for cash capital, which comes from the operating budget, D for district funding, which is a parcel-based charge, DC for district cash, which comes from the Pure Waters operating budget, E for enterprise funds, which are the same as users' fees, P for private funds, F for federal funds, and or S for state funds. There are 138 projects in the recommended CIP. 66 of those projects are scheduled for the budget year, 2021. There are 14 new projects in this recommended CIP, and most of those are introduced into the CIP in the last year, 2026. Table 2 on pages 4 and 5 of your CIP lists the 66 capital budget projects in priority order as determined by the Monroe County Planning Board. 2021 capital projects will require just over $30 million in county funding. Now I'm going to address individual departments in the CIP per their pertinence to each individual committee. So the Public Safety Committee has two sections of the CIP that are pertinent to it: the Department of Public Safety and the Sheriff's Office. Information about the Department of Public Safety 6-year program begins on page 79. There are 14 projects in their program, and none are new to the CIP. 3 projects have changes in their funding schedules compared to the adopted program based on improved understanding of project need and priority. The Sheriff's program begins on page 86 of the CIP. There are 8 projects in the Sheriff's program, and there are no changes in the recommended program as compared to the adopted program. The Sheriff's program accounts for 6.3% of the total capital improvement program. Next, on to the Rec and Ed Committee. There are 4 sections rather of the CIP related to the Rec and Ed Committee: MCC, the library, the Parks Department, and the zoo. MCC's funding plan, which begins on page 12, contains the same 5 projects that are in the adopted CIP. Their program will likely look different next year because they are currently working on a facilities master plan update. Note that all county funding for MCC is matched by the state. MCC's program accounts for 11.5% of the total capital improvement program. The Monroe County Library System begins on page 20 of your CIP. One project, Library System Automation, is a county-funded project that provides ongoing support for and upgrades to the library's automation system. The library program accounts for only 2.2% of the total CIP. The 6-year program for county funding of the Parks Department and the zoo begins on page 51. The general pattern for the Parks Department is to fund a master plan update, then design, and then implementation. Master plan update recommendations usually include things like accessibility improvements, trail rehabilitation, and lighting upgrades. The Parks program accounts for 3.5%, and the zoo accounts for 4% of the total recommended CIP. There are 2 sections of the CIP that are pertinent to the Transportation Committee: Highway and Bridges and Traffic Engineering. DOT's Highway and Bridges program begins on page 58 of the CIP. There are 26 projects in the program, 4 of which are new. Most of the funding comes from county, but there is state and federal funding as well, and even 1 project with private funding. 2 of the new projects are for maintenance on 9 separate road segments across the county. The other 2 new projects are for road reconstruction on North Goodman and Clover Streets. County funds for these 2 projects are programmed, for these 2 new projects are programmed in 2026. The Highway and Bridges program accounts for just over 23% of the total capital program. DOT's Traffic Engineering program begins on page 72 of the CIP. There are 11 traffic engineering projects. 1 new project is introduced in 2026. It includes upgrading the Regional Traffic Operations Center on Scottsville Road. With the exception of 1 highway lighting rehabilitation project, which has state and federal funding, the traffic engineering projects are county funded. The traffic engineering program accounts for just over 6% of the total CIP program. Excuse me. Transportation as a whole accounts for almost 30% of CIP funding and almost half of the county funds programmed for the CIP. There are 2 sections of the CIP pertinent to the Human Services Committee: the Medical Examiner's Office and Monroe Community Hospital. The medical examiner's program is found on page 11 of your CIP. Each year, the medical examiner's office upgrades one of its mass spectrometers or gas chromatographs to enhance the speed and analytic capability in determining cause and manner of death. The medical examiner's proposed program accounts for 0.3% of the total capital program. The Monroe Community Hospital program begins on page 16 of the CIP. Monroe Community Hospital is our venerable residential chronic care facility. Enterprise funding for one large project, the physical plant, was in last year's CIP. No new projects were introduced to their program this year, so the program is less than last year. In total, the Monroe Community Hospital program accounts for just over 3% of the entire capital improvement program. Two sections of the CIP are pertinent to the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, Information Services and Board of Elections. Information Services supports network connectivity across the county, as well as tools for human resources, finance, and asset management, computers, servers, and copiers. Their program is described on pages 8 and 9 of your CIP, and their program accounts for almost 5% of the total capital improvement program. The Board of Elections program is on page 10. A few years ago, the federal and state governments indicated that counties would need to upgrade voting equipment in the near future, and so the Board of Elections programmed $3.5 million in capital funds in 2019 and $6.5 million in 2021. The Board of Elections accounts for 1.7% of total funding in the recommended CIP. There are 4 sections of the CIP pertinent to the Environment and Public Works Committee, the airport, and 3 divisions of the Department of Environmental Services. The airport has a large program with 27 projects. Their program begins on page 22 of your CIP. 3 new projects are introduced to the CIP in 2022 and 2023 and are funded with 90 to 100% federal dollars. Airport funding amounts and schedules are subject to change as FAA priorities change. The airport program accounts for 15.1% of the total CIP. Moving on to DES, the Pure Waters program begins on page 37. There are 13 projects in Pure Water CIP this year. The first 4 projects listed, general improvements to the sanitary sewer system in each Pure Water district, are funded with district cash, and so will not impact the district's debt service payments. 5 new Pure Waters projects are introduced to the CIP in 2026, giving us time to further evaluate these needs. The Pure Waters program accounts for 12.9% of the total capital improvement program. Facilities program begins on page 44 of the CIP. There are 10 projects in this program, and there is 1 new project this year. Fleet maintenance building improvements is introduced to the CIP in 2026. Overall, the facilities program accounts for 6.3% of the capital improvement program. Solid Waste Division of DES begins on page 49, is on page 49 of your CIP. It accounts for 1% of the total program, and there are no changes from the adopted program. I will be happy to take questions when you get to this item on your agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. You have the minutes from the May 26, 2020 meeting of the Committee of the Whole before you. They will stand approved unless the clerk is notified of any changes by the end of the day. We will now proceed with new business. Will the clerk read the next item on the agenda?
Referral 20-0205, enacting a local law requiring pharmacies to provide notice of the availability of naloxone.
Mr. President,
Yes.
may I speak to the bill?
We gotta move it.
We have to move it and second it, and then you can
Okay.
have the floor.
Thank you, sir.
What happened here?
Do we have a motion?
Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Is somebody going to move it?
So moved,
Second.
legislator Baines.
Moved by legislator Blaine, seconded by legislator Hebert and Taylor. Legislator Wilcox is the sponsor. I will offer you the floor first if you would like to make any comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. As you're aware, people are overdosing and dying at a significantly higher rates than last year. That is why we urgently need to increase awareness and distribution of Narcan in our community. Narcan is an emergency treatment that, if administered at the first sign of an overdose, will lessen or reverse the life-threatening symptoms. Narcan is relatively simple to administer, and New York State pays all or most of the patient cost. For the same reason that we have first aid kits, anyone who has an opioid medication in the house should also have Narcan on hand, just in case. That's why I introduced this legislation to require every pharmacy in Monroe County to dispense at least one dose of Narcan to every individual picking up an opioid prescription, unless that individual opts out in writing. The legislation will ensure that pharmacists at least have a conversation about Narcan with their clients. With that said, Mr. President, pharmacists and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have raised excellent questions that are not specifically addressed in this legislation. For example, who pays the copay differential between the Narcan copayment assistance program and what your insurance company charges as a copay? Who covers those without insurance? How do you manage the opt-out documentation? Pharmacists have expressed concerns about the supply of Narcan. Pharm techs, will they have the authority to have these conversations with the patients? And while any costs appear to be minimal that would be borne by the county, what exactly are those costs? In order to address these questions and any others that legislators may have, I'd like to ask the president to refer this legislation to the administration and for them to get back to us within the next 60 days to address these questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this?
Mr. President, it's Legislator Smith. I do have a few questions and hopefully if I ask those could be sent to the administration as well.
Very good. You have the floor, Legislator Smith.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Legislator Wilcox for putting this forth through the legislation, as it's a very important topic in the community. I myself have been Narcan trained, and I feel it's very important for our community to have this. I believe the intent of the law is truly well-intentioned, and we all want a safer community. Upon receiving the legislation, I did do some research, and Legislator Wilcox actually touched upon some of that tonight with some of the questions he wants to further to the administration, but just a few other ones that I hope they would consider. Through the president, the legislative action in the referral states that customers filling an opioid prescription must be provided a co-prescription of naloxone only when they first fill an opioid prescription. However, the text of the local law, which is the part that is codified and enforced, makes no mention of a first fill only co-prescription. Is it legislators Wilcox intent for this to be for first fills only, or each time an opioid prescription is filled?
Through you, Mr. President, the intent is whenever there is a prescription, not a refill, a prescription for there to be this co-prescription. Thank you. That's an excellent question.
Okay, thanks. Through the president to Legislator Wilcox again, similar statewide legislation I looked up, like in New Jersey, limits co-prescriptions to those regular taking higher doses of opioids, specifically those regularly receiving 90 morphine milligram equivalents a day or more, as well as those taking opioids and I'm not going to say it right, benzodiazepine concurrently. Was there any consideration taken as far as to see, like, how much of a dose is being taken would then decide if a Narcan, if you would then fill a prescription for Narcan?
That is an excellent question and one that we should relate to the administration and specifically to the commissioner.
Perfect. Again, just another one, and this would either be for you, Legislator Wilcox or Dr. Mendoza. It's my understanding, due to the HIPAA laws, pharmacists, it's up to the pharmacist's discretion as to whether they would allow a person to pick up someone else's prescription. If another person was picking up a prescription, would they be able to opt out on the individual who has the prescription coming to them? Would they be able to opt out for them?
I will defer to Dr. Mendoza on this one.
Mr. President, this is Jeff McCann. Dr. Mendoza is not on the call this evening, but that's definitely a question we can present him with.
Okay. Through the president, and again, this could be another one for Dr. Mendoza. How was the opt-out process, and I think you said you were going to look further into this, going to work across pharmacies? So if you had someone that actually went to two different pharmacies, one being close to their work and one close to their home, would they have to opt out at each location?
No, that through you, Mr. President, Legislator Smith asked a question that specifically was one of the questions that's been raised, and one of the questions I would hope the administration would answer with respect to how to manage the opt-out documentation.
Okay. And then when you guys, when you were looking at this legislation, did you ever think about doing more of an opt-in instead of an opt-out? That way it'd be kind of maybe less work on pharmacies in the patient. You would have to then just opt in to get the Narcan.
I think that's something, again, certainly worth looking at. The idea, honestly, is to try to raise the awareness that this is actually already currently available for a lot of folks. So, for example, Monroe County being a registered opioid overdose program with New York State, we already have the ability to administer or to deliver Narcan for free. What we're trying to do is make people aware that this program also exists effectively at pharmacies as well. If you have insurance with, again, copay being covered by the Narcan copayment assistance program. So the idea is to raise awareness, and frankly, if it raises awareness, even an opt-in provision could be worthy.
Absolutely. Thank you. Through the president, again, to Legislator Wilcox, the local law, if passed, would essentially become effective immediately upon signing. Could you think about some type of consideration or grace period being given to pharmacies to be able to stock up? And you kind of brought that up. They only kind of carry so much at a time.
Through the president to Legislator Smith, again, excellent question. And frankly, I can sort of address some of these questions. Actually, we can address, but we can't address them as extensively as I would like the administration to. For example, the supply issue can be addressed through the program that we already have with the county. In other words, the county has a supply of Narcan. We do have to work out how we would resupply potentially the pharmacies or supply them initially. Supply should not be an issue, although it's one that has been raised. In theory, we have enough Narcan, the county does, to resupply. Again, we'd have to work out those details, probably have to work with the New York State Department of Health to make sure that we could do this. So again, the idea of a supply and a grace period does make some sense. I mean, effectively, that's what I'm trying to buy us with asking the administration to address these questions and get back to us within 60 days, is to allow us all a bit of a grace period to sort of understand how we would implement this and how they would be resupplied.
Okay, thank you. Through the president again to County Legislator Wilcox. What about training? I know when I took it myself, it was about an hour-long training on how to use Narcan. I do understand, just talking to a few pharmacists, they do about a 5-10 minute training. Have you taken that into account, how long that will take them to, if there's more people getting the prescription?
Absolutely, and that's one of the questions that the pharmacist asks us is, would we allow farm techs to, for example, have those conversations? And that's
Okay.
something we should certainly contemplate, allowing farm techs to do that as well.
Okay. Through the president to Legislator Wilcox again, have you thought anything about what type of penalty a pharmacy would incur if they were non-compliant to this local law?
I have not thought about the penalty, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Again, I would hope that, frankly, I'll be honest with you, I'm sorry, through you, Mr. President, most of the pharmacists I have talked to, as well as the associations, nobody is opposed to this that I've
No.
talked to, at least the pharmacists and the pharmacist associations. There are a number of pharmacist associations, not one of them speaks for all of them, but none of them are opposed. And the pharmacists in general really like, I've worked with pharmacists in the school here locally on pharmacy on this legislation, and they are very supportive of it. Again, they have these questions that we should try to address. That's why I would like, with the administration, this to be referred to the administration for them to come back to the legislature and address the various questions that we all have as legislators.
Right. And just one last one through the president to the administration and Legislator Wilcox.
Mhm.
Do you envision any increase in liability to the pharmacies once we put this local law out there?
Through you, Mr. President, I do not.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I think it's a good idea for any legislator that has any questions to verbalize them so we can get everything on the record, even though it is going to be referred to the administration.
Yeah,
Any further discussion here?
Mr. President, this is Legislator Brew.
Go ahead, Legislator Brew, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Legislator Wilcox for bringing this piece of legislation forward. I agree. I personally felt that there wasn't a path forward with this tonight, given the complexities of the questions and the complexities of the law. So I agree with the moving this referral to the administration so that they can adequately address some of these more detailed questions. We did put quite a bit of work into compiling a list of questions, and I don't have as many as Legislator Smith, and I appreciate all of her questions. They were very good. Just saying that I will be somewhat brief, and seeing that Dr. Mendoza's here, I may skip a couple of these questions anyways, but through you, Mr. President, to Legislator Wilcox or the administration, pharmacies and insurance companies are both regulated at the state level. Is there guidance from New York State or specific provision of the county charter or county law that gives the county the ability to require action in the form of a co-prescription and subsequent insurance coverage from these industries which operate outside of our control?
Through you, Mr. President, to Legislator Brew, excellent question, Legislator Brew. We are not in any way, shape, or form actually regulating or any way superseding Department of Financial Services oversight of insurance companies. In fact, they are already required to pay for these. They probably don't want the increased awareness that this program effectively exists, because that will mean additional expenses, given that the copay would be covered under the Narcan Copayment Assistance Program, but the $125 that the insurance companies pay would still have to be paid by the insurance company. So the insurance companies are not huge fans of this legislation. But I don't think that should have anything to do with whether or not we move forward with frankly, our police powers that we have to regulate health and safety at the local level. So Legislator Brew asked an excellent question. I believe we have the authority. I believe most of this program already exists. And in fact, we're simply requiring an opt-out provision.
Okay, thank you, Legislator Wilcox. I do have a follow-up question to that. Since the pharmacies and insurance companies are state regulated, how will the adherence to this local law be monitored or enforced? Would that be incumbent on the county legislator?
Yeah, through the president, again, I think that's an excellent question. It does go back to the idea of how we monitor compliance and how we manage the opt-out documentation. That's really what we would be responsible for. So with respect to the insurance companies being regulated by the Department of Financial Services, nothing changes. The Department of Financial Services would continue to oversee the insurance companies and make sure that they make the payments for Narcan, which is required to be covered. So the Department of Financial Services responsibility would remain largely the same as the primary regulator of the insurance companies. We would not in any way, shape, or form be regulating insurance companies.
Okay, thank you. The next question is that I did learn that several states have implemented policies where naloxone is co-prescribed with opioid prescriptions. Do you know if there's any counties in New York that have passed similar legislation?
Legislator, sorry, through you, Mr. President, I don't know if there are any other counties in New York that have passed similar legislation to what we're putting forward. It's an excellent question, something we certainly could ask the administration to look at and review. Certainly with the idea that we would certainly want to know if they've implemented it, what are their experiences with the program?
Yes, through the president, absolutely. And I would think that the administration would do due diligence and maybe if this is the case that other counties have enacted a similar piece of legislation, that they would try to contact them and learn from their past experience.
Absolutely.
To the president, to Legislator Wilcox, would the legal requirement to co-prescribe be based on the location of the pharmacy or on the residence of the individual filing the prescription?
I apologize. Through you, Mr. President, I apologize. I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you restate it, please?
Yes. Will the legal requirement to co-prescribe be based upon the location of the pharmacy or on the residence of the individual filling the prescription?
I apologize, Legislator Brew. The way I envision this, and I apologize that I'm not understanding the question completely. Maybe I haven't had enough sleep or enough coffee, so my apologies. My understanding is that the co-prescription requirement would be based upon the actual. So let's just use me as an example. Let's just say I had an opioid prescription and I went into the pharmacy. The requirement would be to co-prescribe me, the person. And I apologize. I think I'm starting to understand your question. So it's an extraterritorial question. So you're asking, and I apologize, Mr. Brew, correct me if I'm wrong on your intent. Are you saying that if someone from Ontario County came into Monroe County, would we be required to co-prescribe? Is that what I apologize through you, Mr. President.
Through the president, Legislator Wilcox. No, it was more dealing with the residents of Monroe County, and as far as dealing with the legal requirement of the pharmacies to co-prescribe, if that would be based upon, the location of the pharmacy or the resident.
Okay. Through you, Mr. President, I think I understand the question. It's still sort of almost an extraterritorial question. In other words, if your pharmacy is in another county instead of the resident, would that, again, legislator, please correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation of your question, would that pharmacy in another county be required to prescribe, co-prescribe to that Monroe County resident? Is that what you're asking?
That would be one of the questions I had, Legislator Wilcox. But one thing that I can do is articulate this particular question a little better. And when I formally submit these to the administration, I'll make sure and clean that up a little bit.
Thank you, Legislator Brew. And I do understand extraterritorial questions are always ones that we need to take into account. Our ability to regulate extraterritorially is somewhat limited. We really can only regulate what's within Monroe County. So that's a great question, I think,
Yeah.
if I understood part of it.
Yeah, and just a couple more follow-up questions through the president. Insurance companies oversee the healthcare coverage of millions throughout the counties. Have you had any discussion with any of the health insurance companies regarding any potential operational issues that may arise, since the law would only affect Monroe County?
Mhm.
And if you have, what are some of those concerns?
Well, I will say this, through you, Mr. President, an excellent question. The insurance companies, again, this puts no, I hate to say it this way, this puts no additional onus on the insurance companies other than they're probably going to pay more. In other words, there's going to be more people using the program, the Narcan Copayment Assistance Program. More people will actually be using it, which is a good thing. That's what we want. We want to prevent overdoses. We want more Narcan in people's homes. And the insurance companies do have some concerns about the additional costs to them, not of administering it, because they already have to administer this. They already have to make the payments to the pharmacies. They're just going to have more of them because more people will be aware of the program. And frankly, they will be required to be informed about the program and opt out. Unless, of course, we take Legislator Smith's idea and we do an opt-in. But still, the awareness will increase, and therefore the cost to the insurance companies will increase as they have to make additional payments. So, excellent question. But in all honesty, the onus and the burden on them is a financial one that they certainly don't want to have to incur. But again, if it makes our residents safer and we can save another child, if we can prevent the death of a child from an accidental overdose, or frankly, anyone for that matter, I would say it's well worth it, especially since it's a coverage that's already required under the law.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And through the president, a follow-up question, and that would conclude my questions other than a closing statement. But through you, Mr. President, to Legislator Wilcox, the health insurance is, they could be shouldering somewhat of a significant expense on this. And my concern is that some of those expenses would be passed down to small businesses and individuals. Do we know, or do we expect that this law would have an increased liability for some of those small business, resulting in the increased healthcare coverage costs passed down to them by the insurance companies?
Yeah, so, Mr. President, excellent question from my colleague. The way that New York State law works is a health insurer may not simply pass along costs because we have such thing as the medical loss ratio enshrined in New York State law. That ensures that for every premium dollar that we pay as insureds, 85 cents of that premium dollar has to go to healthcare coverage. So there is the chance that some additional expenses would, of course, get passed along to consumers if they could show that the additional expense on health insurance coverage was warranted. We have a law in New York State called prior approval that also requires that health insurers have to go to the Department of Financial Services and they have to demonstrate that they need the additional money to remain solvent. Okay, because again, 85 cents of every dollar need to go directly to paying health insurance costs. So it's really a matter of solvency and ensuring that the 85 cents is in fact going to healthcare costs. So to the extent that they're requesting additional money, they'd have to prove that to the Department of Financial Services when they submit their rates.
Okay. Thank you, Legislator Wilcox. And through the president, if I could just close by saying that I I want to restate that I feel that this legislation was brought to us with the best intentions, and I'd like to thank you, Legislator Wilcox, and the administration for your efforts in trying to answer the questions of the legislature this evening. I do, however, as I'm sure many of my other legislative colleagues do feel that there are many unanswered questions, and I do agree with you wholeheartedly to refer this to the administration to give them adequate time and to solicit the adequate resources to answer these questions as I'm certainly that they're capable of doing. Thank you.
Legislator Baines.
Go ahead, Legislator Baines.
I have one question through the president to Legislator Wilcox. I may have a follow-up. Legislator Wilcox, will this legislation save lives? And were it in action and effect, might it have saved the life of a child in your district?
Through you, Mr. President, thank you, Legislator Baines, for the questions. We examined, and let me just say, for those of you who aren't aware, young Maisie Gillen died accidentally ingesting. She was 9 months old. She accidentally ingested a methadone pill at a neighbor's house. And while this particular piece of legislation would not have saved Maisie's life, because they didn't know until well after the fact that that's what had occurred, because it wasn't clear the circumstances at the time. It was only clear, unfortunately, a day later what had occurred. I've worked with the parents on multiple iterations of legislation to prevent future deaths, as well as with the administration with Dr. Mendoza. And by the way, let me take this opportunity to thank Dr. Mendoza and County Executive Bello and Adam and Mary Beth Gillen for their work on this legislation. We went through multiple different versions until we came up with one. And again, working with Dr. Mendoza, one that we know for a fact will save lives. In fact, we'll probably be able to produce a report annually stating how many lives have been saved, because we will know who got it and we'll know when it was administered. And so we will know that it has saved lives. And again, Legislator Baines, one of the things we also know is that it has saved children from accidental overdoses when there's Narcan in the house. It has happened. And again, God forbid it happens again. But if it does, we know that Narcan in the home is one way to prevent that death.
Thank you, Legislator Wilcox. And through the president, I want to commend you for taking action. And I would hope that as we have our excellent questions reviewed, we do so in the most expeditious manner possible. Because when we're talking about an existing law that saves lives and making people aware of it and holding health insurers, who, by the way, whose costs escalate at 10% a year, irrespective, it seems, of what happens, for us to move expeditiously to affect this law is for us to respond to a crisis that's costing the lives in our community. And I want to thank you for your leadership, Legislator Wilcox. Thank you.
Legislator Hebert.
Yes, Legislator Hebert, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to Legislator Wilcox. Some scripts are not allowed to be issued with refills in this arena, so that every time the person gets them, they're getting a new script.
That's right.
How do you handle that in this legislation?
That's through you, Mr. President, to Legislator Hebert. That's an excellent question. It's one that's been raised by the pharmacists, and it's another reason why, again, I would ask that we take 60 days and ask the administration to come back with potential remedies, solutions, suggestions with respect to that, because as Legislator Hebert rightly points out, that is not addressed in this legislation, because again, the way that some are prescribed, they would have to be they're prescribed often. The intent would not be for every one of those to get a co-prescription of Narcan. It would not make any sense. So thank you, Legislator Hebert. It's an excellent question.
Thank you, legislators. Through you, Mr. President, to Legislator Wilcox again, or the administration, whoever might know the answer to this. You list 127 residents as having been lost to overdoses, which is accurate. Do you have any idea how many of those were lost to prescriptions that were from their own household? I mean, I know some of them, for example, bought prescription drugs on the street, took them home, did themselves in that way.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. President, to Legislator Hebert, I don't know the answer to that question, but what I do know the answer to is this, that we do know that legal prescriptions have caused the death and accidental overdose of many people in this country. And frankly, if you read some of the reports that are produced on accidental prescription overdoses, opioids are among those that have the highest rates of those types of overdoses. So while I can't answer a specific question, I can answer it more generally and say, we do know that this occurs. We know it occurs, unfortunately, more and more frequently, because honestly, the opioid crisis is also, unfortunately, comes along with a lot of folks that are also prescribed opioids. And unfortunately, that does lead to accidental overdoses through legal prescription opioids.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. President, the administration, another question I'd like to have looked into. I know that California and New Jersey, at a minimum, as states, have passed similar legislation. And I'd like to have us take a look, have the administration take a look at that, see what modifications we might be able to steal out of those. Should we just adopt one of those, make a recommendation concerning already passed legislations in other jurisdiction? And that's the end of my questions. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Legislator Smith?
Yes, Legislator Smith.
Through you, Mr. President, to Legislator Wilcox. I agree with you as far as the saving the lives, especially with seniors as well. A lot of seniors do take prescription drugs and may take multiple, not realizing it. So it is great to be able to get Narcan into the hands of family members, but also people of all ages. One question I have for you is, when you said you were looking at the different laws and when you came up with this, and it kind of goes on what Legislator Hebert just said, I know the California law actually calls out that it's the prescriber that needs to prescribe the Narcan prescription. Did you go that route and look to see about putting that on the prescriber to have that conversation with the patient?
No.
Okay.
Through the president, no, because in New York State, we've already allowed effectively, we've kind of already overridden that. In New York State, I could walk up tomorrow I could go to the pharmacy and ask for Narcan. And New York State, generally speaking, that pharmacist, again, they may have a conversation with me, but again, they're going to prescribe it to me. I'm not prescribing it. I don't need a prescription. I'm sorry.
No, right.
So that's sort of the situation we're in New York State, that we sort of waived that requirement for the prescription. So great question, but it's one that we've moved sort of past that because of the crisis, and we're trying to get Narcan in the hands of as many people as possible to save as many lives as possible, because it's the one thing that we do know works. While I did look at other pieces of legislation that I thought would be effective, again, working with Dr. Mendoza and County Executive Bello and the parents, we actually looked at data and we realized this is the one way we can save lives.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, that's great. I concur with the legislator's sentiment and hereby refer this matter to the administration for additional research and follow-up. Next item.
Referral 20-0208, confirmation of reappointment to the Monroe County Recycling Advisory Committee.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by Legislator Taylor, seconded by Legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any opposed? Great, item carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0209, authorize additions to the Western Monroe County Agricultural District.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
By legislator Smith, seconded by legislator Wilt. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Item carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0210, 2021 to 2026 Capital Improvement Program.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Second.
By legislator Smith, seconded by legislators Boyce, Turp, Wilt, Hebert, Alcoffer, Dondorfer, and Delahanty. Before we go to discussion, I'd like the legislators to know that the election commissioners will not be on the call, as tomorrow is the primary and they're quite busy. But if you have any questions for them, please submit any questions in writing and they will get the answers back to you.
Yes,
Now, any discussion?
Legislator Brew.
Legislator Brew?
Yes, through the president to the administration, the Monroe County Charter states that on or before the first regularly scheduled meeting of the county legislature meeting in May of each year, the county executive shall submit to the county legislature the proposed capital improvement program. Is the administration aware that their date of submission is not in compliance with the county charter as this was submitted in June? Was this COVID related? And as I said, I'm curious as to why this wasn't submitted on time.
Through you, Mr. President, it was COVID related. We were still in the process of figuring out how to have all the Monroe County Planning Board meetings we needed to have in before we could submit the referral to the county executive's office.
Thank you.
This is the first year this has happened, and we are aware of what the charter says, and we apologize for the delay.
Thank you.
Legislator Morelli.
Yeah, Legislator Morelli, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just want to explain my vote. First of all, I want to take a moment to recognize Rochelle Bell and all of the work that she does. As my colleague, Legislator Hebert, knows, as we both sit on the planning board for Monroe County, Rochelle does a lot of work when it comes to putting together the CIP, and it's a process that takes a very long time. And Legislator Hebert and I have sat through many of these meetings, and Rochelle has done a great job with coordinating everything. I think that this CIP certainly has been a good opportunity for us to identify what our priorities are here in Monroe County and make sure that we are adequately planning for the future. So I will be voting in favor of it. And again, just want to thank Rochelle and the administration for all their hard work on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Great. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Through the president.
Aye.
Hold on.
Aye.
Oh, we have someone.
Aye. Any opposed? Item carries. Next item.
Referral
Yes?
Excuse me, through the president, this is Don Crum. I'm looking at a memorandum to the County Executive, Monroe County Planning Board, and the CIP Review Committee that says the CIP was submitted May 15th, 2020. and it would be referred to the appropriate committees for consideration during the week of June 22nd. So I believe it was submitted in the timely fashion on May 15th. Just for the record.
That was after the May meeting?
It was May 15th, 2020.
Yes, Mr. President. Yep, and the meeting was May 12th, the legislature meeting of that week.
And the legislature meeting was May 12th.
Okay.
Regardless, she explained the question. She said it was COVID related. There was nothing opposed, so that carries. And now we have the next referral.
Referral 20-0211, authorize an amendment and restated traffic signal easement and agreement with GM Components Holdings LLC to perform traffic signal operation and maintenance services for traffic signal number 535 located at the intersection of Lexington Avenue and GM Components Holdings in the city of Rochester.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by legislator Wilt, seconded by legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Item carries. Next item, please.
Referral 20-0212, amend resolution 294 of 2017 to accept additional funding from the New York State Department of Health and extend the time period and authorize contracts with ACM Medical Laboratory, Inc., DBA, ACM Global Laboratories, and Reliant Staffing System, Inc., DBA, Career Start for the Public Health Campaign Program.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by legislator Hebert, seconded by legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion on this item?
Josh Barth.
Yes. Legislator Barth.
Through the President to the Administration, one brief question. Will some of these funds be appropriated into the 2021 budget?
This is Kathy Hiltunen from Nursing Services and Public Health. This is a yearly draw from money that has funded the public health campaign for about 28 years. It typically would go through March, but the AIDS Institute in New York State has asked for a 2-month extension, so it's going to go into 2021, I think a little bit later than March. I think it's May.
Okay, but then not much through the President.
Through the President, no, not much into 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0213, acceptance of a grant from Health Research, Inc. for the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Program and authorize a contract with the University of Rochester.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
By legislator Hebert, seconded by legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Yes.
this is legislator Hasman. I just want to declare that I'm an employee at the University of Rochester.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on this referral? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0214, acceptance of a grant from the New York State Department of Health for the Drinking Water Enhancement Program.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by legislator Hebert, seconded by legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion?
Josh Barth.
Yes, Josh. Yes, legislator Barth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the administration. Now, I'm not trying to look a gift horse in the mouth. I like getting money like this. But my question is, what exactly will we be doing with these funds that we're not currently doing?
Through the speaker, this is Sky Halleck, Public Health. The additional funds allow us to pay our salaries to do this work. It is mandated work. We would be required to do this without the grant. So it gives us the ability to pay for salaries and costs associated with that to continue this work.
So thank you. Through the president, we would be required to do this work regardless of whether or not we got the grant, correct?
To the speaker, that is correct. We would be mandated to perform this work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Legislator Hebert,
Go ahead, Legislator Hebert, you have the floor.
through you, Mr. President, to the administration, how many existing positions does this grant support?
Through the speaker, Sky Halleck at the Health Department. This actually supports a 10, through the president, this is Scott. This supports 10 sanitarians, public health sanitarians, a public health engineer. These are our field workers that actually perform the work.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. President, that is a substantial amount of work. Thankfully, we are getting a grant, but I believe it's a 5-year grant, which appears it's flat. Are these 11 people like not going to get raises in the next 5 years, or is that something we just have to bear?
Through the speaker, or through the president, this is Scott at the Health Department. These sanitarians are budgeted also in the county budget. These funds help cover our budget, but they will get raises. They're union members, public health sanitarians. They're grade 12s.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0215, authorize a contract with the University of Rochester for support of the Forensic Pathology Fellowship Program, Monroe County Office of the Medical Examiner.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by
Mr.
Legislator
President?
Hebert, seconded by Legislator. Yes.
One more time, this is Legislator Hasman. I'm with the University of Rochester.
Thank you, Legislator Hasman. Okay, moved by Legislator Hebert, seconded by Legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion?
Josh Barth.
Yes, Legislator Barth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you to the administration, will the person holding this fellowship be still a medical student at some level, or will be a full doctor at the time of the fellowship?
Fellowship is usually after residency, so he would be a full doctor.
Okay, so
Mr. President?
I'm going to go with that. So my follow-up question to that then would be, Mr. President, so would this position come with benefits? And if so, who'd be paying for those benefits through the president?
Mr. President, may I? It's Bob Zerby from the Medical Examiner's Office.
Go ahead.
Through you, this is basically an employee position at the University of Rochester. It is a medical doctor, and they have completed their training essentially.
That's fun.
Somebody put their phone on
But I got a
hold.
phone too.
Got some.
Sorry, guys, just a little intermission music jazz that I wanted to play for you all.
Thank you, Legislator Zale. I
Very,
appreciate
very
it.
snazzy. Thank you.
So,
Go ahead, we could go to that question, the administration about the fellowship.
and who's paying for the benefits?
So again, they're an employee of the university. The university handles their salary and their benefits.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Item carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0216, authorize a contract with Crane Hogan Structural Systems, Inc. for the construction services for the Northwest Quadrant Water Resource Recovery Facility Primary Clarifier Improvement Project.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by legislator Dondorfer, seconded by legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion?
Josh Barth.
Yes, legislator Barth.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know I love my clarifier projects. My question is, what is the current timeline on this project?
Through you, Mr. President, this is Mike Garland from DES. We expect to have the work completed and the clarifier in operation by October of 2021.
Thank you. Through the President, is that considered to be, is that a new deadline, a new endpoint, or that's been the one we've passed CIPs?
Through you, Mr. President, this is for the Northwest Quadrant Water Resource Recovery Facility, and where we had the open house last year, which I know Legislator Baroth, you were there in attendance. And so this is at Northwest Quadrant. And again, we don't have a regulatory deadline associated with this project.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Legislator Hebert.
Legislator Hebert, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Through you to the administration, do you require shutting down a clarifier tank to make these improvements?
Through you, Mr. President, yes, we do.
Through you, Mr. President, to the administration, since there are only 2 of them, does that reduce the capacity of the plant by 50% during this work? And if so, is there any impact on the residents who utilize this plant?
Through you, Mr. President, obviously the timing and phasing of taking the tanks down, they wouldn't be down obviously at the same time, but we will do it in a way that will not impact our ability to treat flow.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm done.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Item carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0220, amended contract with Reliance Staffing Systems, Inc., DBA Career Start, to provide nursing services for the Monroe County Department of Public Health in response to COVID-19.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by legislator Hebert, seconded by legislator Delahanty. Is there any discussion?
Sorry, yes.
Legislator Barra.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just I want to check with the administration. I'm assuming that we had to get this done immediately, otherwise we'd not be able to hire these individuals in a timely fashion. Is that correct, the President?
This is Kathy Hiltunen from the Health Department. Yes, that is correct. We are continuing with our COVID work, but we need to be able to fund it.
Okay, so through the President, funding was running out otherwise, correct?
Yes, through the President, it was running out, and we will use CARES funding to cover these services as we go forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Carries. Next item.
Referral 20-0221, approve the conclusion of hazard pay due to greater risk of exposure or working extended hours due to the county's response to COVID-19 for certain classifications of Monroe County employees.
Move it, Mr. President.
Second.
Moved by legislator Delahanty, seconded by legislator Hebert. Is there any discussion?
Yes, Mr. President, Legislator Boyce.
You have the floor, legislator Boyce.
Yes, just through the President to the administration, just curious as to what we're basing making this a conclusion of this hazard pay. that our health department workers are not being exposed to people?
Through the president, this is Andrea Gazetta, the HR director. The specific titles in the health department are the people who go out, they're known as the strike team. They actually go out and test different people for COVID. So they are interacting, they will remain interacting with the public in that capacity.
Through the president, so based on that answer, why would we be including hazard pay for those individuals if they're actually testing folks?
Through the president, those are the people remaining from the public health department. I'm sorry if I responded in a way that didn't make that clear.
All right, so I guess my misunderstanding. So through the president, can you restate your answer again? So the people that we're concluding hazard pay for are not being exposed to any individuals that might put them at greater risk.
Through the president, that is correct. The public health had said that these are the three people, there's two different titles, 3 people in total who would remain going past the conclusion of the original hazard pay.
Is that sufficient, Legislator Boyce?
Maybe I'm not stating my question properly. So the people that we're concluding the hazard pay for are not being exposed at a greater risk or would put them in harm's length. Is that what you're saying? Through the president.
Through the president, yes, that's correct. Through the president, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Item carries. Are there any other matters to come before the committee of the whole?
Legislator DeFlorio.
Yes, Legislator DeFlorio.
Thank you. Through you to the administration. Several weeks ago, I was contacted by the president of the Churchville Chi graduating class looking for some help and explanation regarding the rules and decisions being made by the state regarding graduation ceremonies. I asked on our next daily conference call. Unfortunately, the county executive was not in attendance, and Mr. McCann told me he would ask the questions at the control room meeting they were having and get back to me. I never got an answer from him, so I put a formal letter to the administration well over a week ago, looking for answers and an explanation. I asked that I get a response by tonight's meeting. As of just before the meeting took place, I still have not gotten an answer from anyone from the administration. So I'm wondering if they have an explanation for me at this point, although it is probably too late now to do any changes for graduation. I feel that I owe it to these students who advocated not only to myself, but multiple state elected leaders who never bothered to get back to them either. I feel I owe them some type of answer. Is there anyone on the phone who has that answer, those answers for me, or an explanation as to why I've not heard back from anyone?
Legislator, this is Jeff McCann. I remember the phone call you're making reference to. The county executive was not on that phone call. He was on the next phone call, and it's my recollection that he explained the situation at that time regarding the control room. As you know, which I believe we shared with you, or if we didn't, I apologize. The rules governing this are not set locally. They're set by the governor. That's something we've raised your concern multiple times. And again, I guess the answer sort of is what it is. I'm in a similar situation. I have a high school senior who is graduating this year, and there's some question and confusion, or some question, not really confusion, as to what's going to happen. And until we get further guidance from the state, simply put, I don't think there's going to be an answer to your question or an answer to the question raised by the students. And again, I would just take exception that you didn't hear back from anyone. I believe the county executive addressed it. And if you can actually give me a moment, I can talk to someone here very quickly regarding your letter and what the status is of that.
I'm not sure if he was able, if he addressed it on the Thursday call. I asked for somebody to get back to me because I knew I would not be able to be on that Thursday call. I did ask our legislative staff, and he did not hear it addressed on the Thursday call. But I had asked specifically for somebody to get back to me because I knew I could not be on that call. I had a medical appointment to attend to with a parent.
Legislator, through the president, this is Don Crum. We had sent an email, I believe on Thursday, telling you that we were having trouble getting the answer from New York State. We still have not gotten the answer despite requesting from them for the reasoning and the criteria, I believe is the word you used in your letter. But I apologize if you didn't see the email.
The email said that you were looking into getting the answer and that you would be following up with me, but it did not say you were waiting to hear answers back from the state.
Oh, I apologize. Since it was from the governor, I must have assumed that. But we still have not gotten any response whatsoever.
And I appreciate that, but I guess I'm wondering what we, as an administration, are doing to advocate for our residents. I continue to feel like we're lumped under one state rule for certain decisions and certain things. Other things, local decisions are being made. Our local elected, or our local towns were given control to decide whether or not.
Point of order, Mr. President. What does this have to do with the legislature? It seems like the legislator.
It's another matter to come before the legislature because I cannot get the answers any other way. Well, I've tried to seek other remedies to get this answer, and I cannot. So thank you.
Point of order, Mr. President, if Legislator DeFlorio thinks a week is bad, she ought to have been there when the D'Onofrio administration did absolutely nothing for Democrats.
Well, I can't speak to what happened in the past. I can only address what's happening today.
Excuse me, Mr. President. Legislator talking here. I believe this is the question that should have gone to the state to begin with. It's not a question for if the governor's executive order prevented graduation ceremonies. The question should have never gone to the county executive in the first place.
I think Legislator DeFlorio made her point. I think Legislator DeFlorio, the best way to go ahead with this is you should carry on this conversation with the administration offline.
Thank you.
You've made your point.
Legislator Baines.
Yeah, we're done with this, Legislator Baines. If it's about this, we're going to carry this offline. The committee of the whole stands adjourned.
Censorship.
Rise and report in the same manner as the legislative standing committees. The June 22nd, 2020 special meeting of the legislature is reconvened. There being no unfinished business, Legislator Brew.
The this meeting does stand adjourned, Mr. President, and the next meeting of the Monroe County Legislature is scheduled for Tuesday, July 14th, 2020 at 6 p.m.
Thank you.